welcome everyone. I'm so excited that you made it to this session. We had a few people who are stuck in traffic, but we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to introduce Cassidy. She is going to be doing our presentation today on the IRA bill. I know that we always hear so much about it, but she's here to kind of break some of this down for us and to talk a little bit in detail about some of the technologies and incentives for commercial real estate buildings, and kind of understand how this is helping us get one step closer to our 2030 goals. We have building owners here, we've got a lot of our members here, and we're really excited to see how that's going to help us get closer, one step closer to these goals. So I'm going to hand it over to Cassidy to get it started.
Great. Hi everybody, thanks for having me today. So I'm fine if we just kind of make this a dialogue and ask questions. I think we have an hour and 15 minutes for this presentation, so I've got plenty of time to go through the content. So happy to just kind of talk through things as they come up. A little bit about myself and why I'm here. Picture's old, number of inches of hair ago. So I was in the green building consulting world, lead consulting, worked for Austin Energy's green building program for a number of years. Went over to Spear. Some of y'all know Spear, South Central Partnership for Energy Efficiency as a Resource. I was there for a few years running their local government outreach program. It's actually where I learned about the district, worked with the city of Dallas on some things, and NCT COG. Got to know the DFW area quite a bit during that period of time. I'm based in Austin, so I'm not local, I apologize. And now I'm with Ameresco. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Ameresco here in a second, but I help our development and sales team with policy. The IRA is a big part of my work. I have a background in sustainability, and so, I work around research and those policy initiatives at Ameresco. I do want to really reiterate, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant. This is not tax advice, this is not legal advice. This is just the basis of me researching and unpacking the details of this law and how it applies to the built environment. So a little bit about Ameresco. Ameresco is about a 20-year-old company. We have worked, we position ourselves as a clean tech integrator, which means that we design, build, operate, maintain, finance energy assets. So we will do everything from all the way through from procurement, financing, through design, build, own, operate. Mostly in the existing built environment, so a lot of energy efficiency and renewable energy, distributed renewable energy work. About 1,500 employees. We've done over $13 billion in energy projects. We kind of break our work into three major categories of service offerings. So we start with the planning stage of decarbonizing to net zero, help develop a plan, do the data analysis, offer resilience and energy security resources. So again, that distributed microgrid, battery storage development, and then our core of energy efficiency and cost savings. Kind of a little bit more about the offerings in each category. So again, energy efficiency, lighting upgrades, HVAC, etc. Distributed energy, we have some wind, both on and off grid solar. We have a significant renewable natural gas business. We actually have some of that operations here in Dallas. Infrastructure, we do a lot of advanced metering infrastructure work in Texas, and then our software data management and advisory services. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. What's everybody's level of familiarity? How many of you have spent some time kind of learning about the IRA and the tax incentives that are in it? Oh, perfect. I have like a new audience. Amazing. I have done this presentation like 50 times at this point. I did tweak it for y'all a little bit. So I'm glad to have like a fresh audience on this. It's great. Okay, so the IRA, it came into law August 2022. It had a lot in it that was not energy and sustainability and climate related. Some of you, may be aware that there were things related to Medicare, there were things related to the IRS, but we're really focusing on the energy and climate aspects of it today. So about OMB, Office Management Budget estimates about $394 billion of incentives for energy and climate. That number actually may grow, and the reason it's growing is because they're tax credits. So the more entities that take the tax credits, that number will increase over time. But one thing that I really want to emphasize here, 2/3 of it is tax incentives. So, and there are grants and forgivable loans and subsidized loans in the bill, but tax incentives is the majority of the way that this bill is encouraging clean energy transition, energy efficiency, et cetera. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, because the grants that are in the bill are really targeted on certain types of projects, public sector projects, tribal lands, historically disadvantaged communities, things like that. So the commercial real estate benefits are really on the tax side. Throughout the bill, some of you may have heard the term Justice 40. The Justice 40 initiative is Biden's initiative that 40% of the benefits from federal spending in the IRA and also the infrastructure bill that passed before it should flow to communities that are historically disadvantaged. You'll see that thread show up in the tax credits, but you really see it show up in the grant programs. Each grant program applicant has to come with a community benefits plan. It's very targeted towards increasing equity and climate justice in the implementation of it. The bill, by some estimates, is expected to reduce total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by up to 40% by 2030. So this is kind of this is an older diagram from before the IRA actually passed, but a few different scenarios. But this is the business as usual, and then this is where the IRA landed us. So it's about 1.5 years old at this point. So what are we actually seeing happen? Clean energy and transportation investment, kind of economy-wide, is up 38% from 2022. So there is a substantial increase in the investment in the clean energy industry. Causation or correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, but there's pretty good indication that they're related. There have been 280 clean energy projects that have been announced. These clean energy projects span a lot of different project types, but a lot of it's like manufacturing. There's tax incentives explicitly for manufacturing facilities. But then there's included in that the commercial tax incentives as well. Vehicle electric vehicle supply chain. This is like the creation of manufacturing facilities for critical minerals and batteries and components of electric vehicles, and then solar manufacturing. We see a lot of investment on onshoring the manufacture of solar cells, and as a result, expected to create nearly 175,000 jobs. And they're really distributed across the country. Specific to the tax credits, kind of a bit more of a breakdown of where the first year of investments are landing. So the biggest bite of the apple is coming from the clean electricity tax credits, which I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on today. This is the investment tax credit and production tax credit. So this is going to be both utility scale development out in West Texas, and then also local distributed generation investments. Any questions on kind of the bigger picture of the IRA before I get into the tax credits themselves? Selena wanted me to make sure and show this, how this aligns with your 2030 goals. So it's pretty clear alignment in some cases. There are tax credits directly benefiting, tax credits and deductions benefiting energy efficiency and clean energy. There's a dotted line to water conservation. So energy efficiency measures that are related to your water systems can contribute towards some of these tax benefits. And then there is a tax credit for EV charging and electric vehicles. credits, I'm gonna focus on these three categories up here because this is, I believe, what is going to be most relevant to the work that you do in both your buildings and your businesses. So, you know, kind of breaks down into three main categories: clean energy, so this is your solar and battery, wind, energy efficiency, alternative transportation. But I do want to note that in the universe of the tax credits, there are also tax credits benefiting a wider range of technologies. Everything from carbon sequestration to residential tax credits to individuals purchasing clean vehicles, things like that. But we're really going to talk about the production tax credit, investment tax credit, energy efficiency, commercial buildings deduction, or 179D, you may know it as. I'm going to touch a little bit on 45L. This one is not one that I usually speak to because it's about new construction. It may be a little less immediately relevant to your buildings, but for those of you that are involved in the development world, it's something to be aware of. And then electric vehicle and alternative vehicle charging and refueling, and then the commercial vehicle credit. So, starting with the ITC and PTC, the IRA gave us 10 years of tax certainty. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to talk about what certainty looks like, given that we have an election in November, so we'll get into that in a little bit. But as written, it gives tax credit certainty through 2032 or later. It's linked to the U.S. greenhouse gas emissions rate, so that's why it might be later. The investment tax credit and production tax credit, these are the ones that are typically applied or are applied to renewable energy generation and battery storage. They are mutually exclusive, so you can only pursue one or the other. The investment tax credit is a credit on the investment, the upfront costs, and then the production tax credit is a credit on the energy that's actually generated by your facility. Historically, the PTC was like wind was only eligible for the PTC, and I believe solar was only eligible for the ITC. Now the technologies are eligible for both, but we're still seeing that large generation facilities like the wind farms, the PTC is what makes sense for them, and then almost universally on the distributed generation side, anything that would be happening at your buildings would fall into the investment tax credit. It's still a more beneficial tax credit. Starting next year, projects that start construction next year and later are going to transition to what is called a tech neutral tax credit. So we'll go into that in a little bit, but it's basically, right now the ITC and PTC are two specific technologies, two solar, two batteries. Whereas the tech neutral, it's can you generate electricity without emitting greenhouse gases? And there's a very important effect of that transition that we'll go through. Okay, anything here? Okay, so some additional enhancements to the ITC and PTC from the IRA. So as I mentioned, solar is now eligible for both. We're still seeing solar mostly benefiting more from the ITC. So this is kind of the array of technologies that are eligible for the ITC. And this is under the current scheme where it's technology specific, not technology neutral. You know, solar and battery, one big change is that a standalone battery is now eligible, meaning before it had to be connected to a solar or wind facility, now a standalone battery that can be grid charged is eligible for the ITC. And then, let's see, ground source heat pump and geothermal and thermal energy storage. This is pretty substantial if you have a thermal energy storage facility at any of your properties. And then these four technologies are, well, actually these two and linear generators, if they are powered by natural gas, currently are eligible for the ITC if they start construction this year, but it is not anticipated that they will remain eligible in the technology neutral version of the credit. Because again, under the technology neutral, the power has to be generated without associated greenhouse gas emissions. I've heard rumblings that, I mean, there are certainly interests trying to get technologies like CHPs and fuel cells to remain eligible. I will call later today to see if there's actually any traction in that regard, but as of right now, one should assume that those technologies, if they're powered by natural gas, will not be eligible. And then microgrid controllers. This one's a little bit of a weird one that it's gonna fall off, and it almost feels like an oversight, but basically this is the brain of a microgrid. So the battery will remain eligible, the solar will remain eligible, but the computer that keeps it all functioning correctly is no longer gonna be eligible. Okay. One of the big,
Sorry, a question.
Yeah.
Does that mean the software within the microgrid controller? From a
my
funding?
understanding is it's I'm not sure. I mean, I think is the software, and you may be able to, you know this better.
I don't, that's
is
what I'm
there-
asking. I've never heard of a microgrid controller.
Yeah, it's my understanding is it is basically the computer and maybe software and the physical. I don't think there's a lot of physical nature to it. I think it's
The cost
brains.
associated with the brains of it.
Yeah.
So you have the
exactly.
cost of the assets of the solar, and you have the cost of the assets of the battery. There's a cost associated with running that and that software that you could deduct that in the future if it's falling off. I mean, in the past, but it's
Yeah,
falling off.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah, that's my understanding.
thanks.
Anyone else have anything to add on microgrid controllers? I feel like we have a lot of engineers in the room, so. Okay. One of the big, changes to the tax credits, under the IRA is this introduction of labor provisions. So there is, this is kind of going back to what I was saying about Justice 40 and the emphasis on equity. There's a very strong alignment with labor, under the tax credits. So, going back to here, so the ITC is, you basically consider 30% your starting point for the ITC, but the reality is your starting point is actually 6% unless you comply with the labor provisions. The labor provisions only apply to, so if you're looking at batteries or solar, it only applies if you're over a megawatt. So something that you would have on your buildings down here on the solar side may not crest that 1 megawatt level, but any solar or battery project over a megawatt must comply with labor provisions to get up to that 30% level. And then the PTC has a similar proportional reduction if you don't do the labor. Yeah. So details of the labor provisions. So again, over 1 megawatt must pay prevailing wage during construction as well as for 5 years, using the ITC for any alteration and repair work, and then 10 years for the PTC. There are pretty sizable compliance penalties if you do not meet these requirements. On the prevailing wage side, you know, if any of your contractors have worked in the public realm, they're going to be fairly comfortable and familiar with prevailing wage. The registered apprenticeship requirements, though, we're seeing it be more novel in the construction world, especially in our market where unions are not particularly strong. So the requirements for the registered apprenticeship, you have to have a certain number of the total hours worked by these registered apprentices. There are ratios that must be met by, you know, how many journeymen versus apprentices your contractors have. any contractor, subcontractor that has 4 people working on the project must participate in one of these apprenticeship programs. And there are some exemptions and a process for getting an exemption. If you made a good faith effort, you can't get apprentices. And this only applies during construction. It doesn't extend past. Okay. So on top of the 30% ITC, so I'm mostly going to talk about ITC for now. There are bonus credits that can be layered on top of it. So there's 3 categories of bonus credits. The domestic content for 10%, so that'll bump you to 40%. Energy communities will bump you to 50%. And then this limited allocated environmental justice and solar credit that in theory there is a project somewhere in the world that's getting a 70% ITC. The reality is very different. So going through each one of these individually. Domestic content. 100% of the steel and iron, the structural steel and iron components would need to be US made. And then the manufactured products, which right now means everything else in the facility, 40% of the cost of those would need to be US made. There's some certification requirements associated with it. So a lot of how the implementation of the IRA has played out in the market has been really driven by the guidance documents that are coming out from the US Treasury. So first blush, you read this, it's like, okay, Buy America has been a thing for a while, maybe this isn't a big deal. The guidance document that's currently governing the domestic content credit has a lot of challenges associated with it. You do not need to understand this diagram. The point of this diagram is this is the kind of level of breakdown in your facility that would be needed to document the domestic content credit. But the big problems with how the guidance is currently operating is it is requiring going down to a very granular level in the components of a system. So for a solar module, there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 components that have been documented, and the solar provider would have to be able to account for every single one of those components and where it was manufactured and then where it was all put together into a final solar panel. So the guidance made it way more granular than the industry believes it should be. It also requires that each one of those subcomponents, you get your manufacturer's direct cost. So we're asking the adhesive manufacturer to tell us how much that costs that manufacturer. So it's pretty unworkable in the reality of supply chains. It devalues assembly within the US, and there's some lack of clarity on the steel and iron. So I say this all to say that if you are working with a contractor and they're like, oh yeah, the domestic content, we do Buy America all the time. Not the same thing. And we're not really seeing a viable pathway to the domestic content bonus in general right now. There will be a final rule on this coming out later this year, and we're hoping that there's going to be some major changes to the requirements that will make this more accessible to the market, but we'll see.
Hey, Cassie, I have a question. We've run into this in the past. We had heard that in order to meet the domestic content requirements, not just the technology that you're implementing, say you're a provider who only provides one technology into a development that's coming out, but the domestic content applies to everything else that the development is undergoing, not just the technology that you're providing. Say chiller manufacturer, boiler manufacturer, BAS manufacturer, it's not just what you're doing, but it's the entire. Is that what you
So
understand?
it's every piece of a qualifying facility, your solar installation is going into the same bucket, and you're trying to get 40% of that. So maybe to your point, you might have a tracker that's at 40%, and your tracker technology provider is able to say, like, this is 60% domestic content, so you're good. But the taxpayer, who is ultimately the one taking the credit, has to throw it all into one big bucket, and so your solar panels may completely negate the fact that your tracker meets the requirements. Is that what you're talking about?
I think that's kind of what
Yeah.
So I know this speaks, I mean, it's great too that this is a bonus and not like a minimum requirement. This speaks to circularity, and a lot of this may be outside of the owner or taxpayer's control. I doubt that maybe you can shed some light on it, I doubt there's a proven provider list manufacturers that exist out there, but is there a ultimate goal of having a certification process for this so it make it easier for more individuals to find where those, because it sounds like it's a lot of research that has to be done to make that happen.
And it's a lot of looking to the manufacturer to give assurance to whatever level that they're willing to, that the information they're giving you is accurate. The industry has called for a certification, a approval list, some sort of way to facilitate transparency in the process. And when I say the industry, I'm mostly talking about the Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA, and ACP, the American Clean Power. Those are the two industry associations we work with most closely. They have been in negotiations with the administration since the original guidance landed last year, and have this, it's now like a 30-page comments document with all of those recommendations. But until this final rule is issued, we don't know what direction they're gonna go, but they're requesting things like that, yeah.
I don't know how to ask this question, so bear with me. Train's a manufacturer, so we get parts from all over the world, copper, bearings. We're finding it more and more difficult to get domestic resources for what we do. If we have clients that are going through this exercise and they go through all of the steps to get to this point, and then we turn in our information documentation, say, whoops, we get these from Sweden, we get these from Africa. Does that disqualify them completely, or are there certain ramifications or other things involved with the decision making to where it's just not an all or nothing kind of thing?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's officially technically not an all or nothing because of what we were just talking about, that it's kind of all the different things go into the same pool, and you're trying to get to the overall cost, like you're looking at the overall cost of the components and getting 40%. Another thing with the industry associations, I need to plug in my computer so it stops going to sleep. The industry associations are asking for is a de minimis level, so that they, so that anything that's less than 5% of the cost or something like that is excluded from the calculation. And actually what the industry associations are really pushing for, and might get some traction, is that instead of looking at a solar panel and looking at the cells and the frame and the glass and the back sheet, they want this whole thing to go up a level and say that the solar module, and then only the cells, which is the biggest cost value in the solar module, are what they're gonna look like. And if the solar module is assembled in the US, then it qualifies. So they're asking for basically the whole thing to be less granular. And again, it's to be determined what that's gonna look like.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're right, otherwise it's gonna take a lot of time for a contractor or a GC or the owners. That's a lot of headache. They don't wanna mess around with that.
Yeah, but the good news is all of our assemblies are here in America. So if we can bypass that, oh, we bought our bearings from this other country, everything was still assembled, because that's what happens. You buy from all over the world, but all of our factories are here in America. So if that qualifies, then that seems like that's.
In the vast majority of, Trane is, I'm sure, very familiar with Buy America provisions and documentation associated with Buy America, and the fact that it uses different rules, it looks at things slightly differently, like it's creating a lot of confusion in the industry. Charlene, did you have something?
I was just gonna ask about a weighted average. Are they treating the screw at the same value as the glass?
They are asking for actual values of each one of those components, and that's why it gets into this issue of these direct costs, like actually getting that level of information is unworkable.
Yeah, most manufacturers aren't gonna tell you how much they make, how much they're costing. I'll tell you what to sell to you for. but I'm not gonna tell you what I
Exactly,
make.
yeah, I mean,
It's not really the American way.
So this reduces greenhouse gases by being manufactured in America, cutting down on, transportation emissions and,
And encourages US domestic economy. I mean, this is really the labor and job side of things. They want to onshore as much of the clean energy supply chains as possible. And they're
I
trying to
guess we
encourage
got
it with us.
cleaner manufacturing processes than,
In some cases, better labor conditions, but just generally, the more jobs and the more manufacturing that are here, the more, money stays in our economy. Very.
Okay, what we found, in the lead process, not necessarily for the energy, but from green stuff, and you have to have all kinds of certifications. The big companies are right on board, and they've got all the documentation. It's really hurting some of the small manufacturers and the small suppliers, and basically, to a certain extent, put them out of business.
And you're talking about like the EPDs and HPDs? I'm gonna plug in my computer so it stops
We
doing
had
that.
the same problem here with this process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of unintended consequences that folks have raised. There's some pretty substantial unintended consequences on the labor side, because having, your fencing contractor, that's not gonna work. Is there a plug up here?
She's grabbing you an extension.
Awesome. Having your, fencing contractor that has 4 guys building a fence here, around your solar facility, have to participate in a registered apprenticeship, that really limits the smaller contractors that are able to participate in the credits, so. Yeah, I mean, policymaking is complicated business, and, I think the administration and the treasury and the guidance writers, they're trying, but there's certainly, things that have been challenging. Okay.
Cassidy?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, did you may have mentioned this, timing? Any idea when?
For the,
Clarifications or responses
yeah.
to the comments?
So, I was actually on a call about this yesterday. It was expected before the end, expected before June or July. Not to get too wonky, but basically there's a rush to get regulations out by the Biden administration within a timeline that prevents the next potential administration from rolling them back. But there's now a new fight between the executive office of the president and the Made in America office about the details of the final rule that's delaying it. And so now ACP is saying they are no longer giving a timeline for when the final rule is gonna hit. Yeah. Okay, what else? Okay, the second category, this is better.
Cassidy, I think Charlene.
You had
Oh,
something else?
sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
no, you're
gonna
fine.
keep my mouth shut. Perspective, this is only a certain amount of the whole credit, right? You could still go forward, it's just, this is the amount
Exactly.
that's at risk, but you could still get the rest of it.
Yeah, this is only a voluntary 10% bonus. Except, I didn't really get into this in this audience because I don't think there's a lot of public sector representation here. But, historically, the ITC and PTC can only be taken by, it's a tax credit, so taken by an entity that has a tax liability. The IRA introduced an elective pay option, which enables non-profit and tax exempt entities to basically take the credits as a rebate effectively. But it did link full achievement of the direct elective pay to getting this credit, but it allowed a waiver process. And so we are expecting that tax exempt entities pursuing these tax credits will still be able to get the 30% without the stick part of the carrot and stick model, through a waiver process. But there there is a link to full achievement of the ITC for non-tax entities with this. Yeah, but I mean, does anyone here work in public sector or tax exempt work? Yeah.
We do, we do, I was gonna ask you about that, so that's active now?
The elective pay,
Yeah.
or which part?
Well, so we work with, obviously schools, other nonprofits, and so, I think the first version that you're talking about is basically using the contractor or the designer to be able to take the rebate and then they pay that back to the entity.
So that's a completely different thing. You're talking about the 179D thing?
Okay, so that is different.
Yeah, so, and,
That doesn't work the same, it's not.
so the ITC, PTC, and some of the other tax credits are eligible for, they're tax credits that are fully eligible for direct payment for non-tax entities, which means they file paperwork and they get a check for the full value of the tax credit. What you're referencing is under 179D, non-tax entities can assign the deduction to the designer, and then the designer has to be able to monetize the deduction, and then the sharing back to the public entity is it's not formalized, but it's negotiated. So, I actually have a lot of 179D here in a second. Yes, Jerry?
On those tax credits, who gets the tax credit? Is the owner of the building?
Owner of
get
the
it?
facility, yeah.
Okay, 'cause we've tried to help on some of the energy credits from the state on the new construction, and the installing contractor gets the payment.
That's the 179D thing.
So that's
So,
not clear who gets what, and you get a tax credit that assumes that you're paying a bunch of taxes. If you're a smaller size company and you're not paying much of taxes, you don't get anything.
so the ITC and PTC are tax credits that only go to the owner of the facility. So the person, the company that actually owns the solar panels or batteries, or there's now a transferability. It's super complicated. What you have run into and what you're speaking about is the 179D tax deduction is not eligible for this direct payment option. So it has to be monetized through this relationship with the installer, designer, contractor. And then potentially shared back to the owner of the facility. But that designer contractor has to have a tax liability in order to monetize the deduction.
So the program doesn't really impact the designers or the builders or the sellers of equipment or anything. They're still in the same exact thing, but the guy that bought all of this, he gets more money from the government. So the rich guy gets more money.
Well, we get the benefit of selling more stuff.
Yeah.
You'll buy more stuff.
And also the church and the school and the city hall also gets the benefit of these credits too. Just continuing with the tax bonuses, and then we will get in 179D, because I have a feeling that's gonna be, oh gosh, how much time do we have?
Have about
30 minutes, okay, I'll speed up a little bit. Okay, energy communities, this one is easier, and unfortunately, you can see the big hole in Dallas, it's not applicable up here. There's 3 routes to get to the energy communities bonus. 2 of them are clearly identified on a government map, and you can just look at it, and if you're in there, you've got it. If you're not, you don't. Those are the fossil fuel communities and the coal communities routes. So purple is areas that have a certain percentage of employment in fossil fuel industries and have unemployment above the US national average. The orange and yellow have to do with coal communities. There's recently retired coal power plants or coal mines. And then the third one is brownfields. Brownfields are not able to be mapped because brownfields can qualify, they may not be on the radar of public lists of brownfields, but the classic example of what would qualify as a brownfield is a capped landfill. So capped landfill, it's identified to have contamination. It meets, you know, certain public safety standards. You put solar on it, you can get a 10% bonus from it. But as you can see, a lot of the state is going to very easily benefit from this 10% bonus. And you know, obviously Houston is a big area for that. Okay. Finally, this is a allocated bonus, meaning there's only 1.8 gigawatts of eligible bonus in this category, and every year. So every year they only have 1.8 gigawatts that they can dole out. It's only for solar and wind and storage, and for less than 5 megawatts. They kind of broke it out into these categories. The one thing that I'll say about this is there are parts of Dallas that are eligible to pursue this, so anywhere in green. I know, you know, a lot of your properties are here, but there's a lot of other areas around that are eligible. But it was an extremely competitive, oversubscribed program. So for it was really only 210 megawatts that would apply to like a commercial solar facility. And they got 18 times more than the available allocation. So this is all to say that, you know, you might hear about this bonus, just be very cautious about putting it into your model because it's very actually hard to access. Public sector work is going to have a better go at this because they actually get an additional selection criteria. They're bumped up a little bit. And I can talk to you about those details. Okay, 179D. So this is probably where most of you will actually really engage with the IRA. This is the Commercial Energy Efficiency Buildings Deduction. It is a deduction, not a tax credit. So tax credit, you get full value off the bottom line. Deduction, it goes through the entity taking its effective tax rate. 179D has been around since the 90s, so it's not a new concept, and that's why some of you have run into it. But under the IRA, it was beefed up quite a bit. And what they did two kind of major things. They introduced a second pathway. So historically, you were looking for an energy cost reduction compared to a code baseline. They have now introduced a second option for commercial retrofits where you're looking at it from the existing conditions baseline. And you can take either or on a retrofit, and you know, you would want to compare which route is going to be more beneficial or more beneficial to your building. The second thing that they did is they increased the value of it. So historically it was capped out at $1.80 a square foot. Now the maximum deduction is $5 a square foot. And the way that you get 179D is you have to show a minimum 25% reduction from either the code baseline or your existing conditions. And that's the whole building. You're not looking at system by system, you're looking at the whole building. So you have to have a whole building energy model. And then for each 1% increase in your reduction, you increase the value of the bonus up to $5. This is linked to prevailing wage and apprenticeship, the stuff I was talking about earlier with the labor. So in order to get those bigger numbers, you do have to do the prevailing wage and apprenticeship, and there's no size minimum. Every single 179D project has to do the labor stuff in order to get the value, the full value. Okay, so non-tax entities may assign this deduction to the designer. In a for-profit commercial development REIT situation, you take it directly as a taxpayer. If you are doing 179D on a public facility, there is no elective pay option. The way that they've dealt with this is that the owner of the building can assign the deduction to the designer. That designer then has to be able to through their taxes, actually get a financial benefit. But then the sharing back of that benefit to the public entity that is doing 179D is not formalized, it's not explicit in the statute, and there's tax challenges to it. So there's not a standard assumption that that public entity is gonna get value back. Do you guys follow that, or do you want me to unpack that more? Yeah, okay. But for those of you that are on the development side, building owner side, it can be directly monetized through your company. The new energy efficiency retrofit pathway, it is an EUI based calculation, whereas that one is an energy cost calculation. You have to have your designer prepare a qualified retrofit plan where they actually calculate the expected reduction, and then it has to be certified within 1 year of place in service, and then after, or substantial completion, and then after 1 year. Building has to be at least 5 years old.
Can a basic engineering firm certify it? Does that have to be a government entity?
Not a government entity. There are outfits that kind of specialize in the certification
So it
process.
has to be one of those.
I believe it has to be a third party, and not the designer.
Okay.
Yeah. And Stina?
I don't know that offhand, if there's a qualification requirement for
Yeah.
certifying it.
I know we use, like, whenever it's come up, like, we use a third party certifier.
Just improve.
There's a question, is there a list of those, like, are they vetted through?
No, it's
Or-
not like a, you have to have a certification in order to do it. Oh, God, I'm still gonna go to sleep. I think that there are qualifications that you have to be like a professional engineer. I think that there's some things like that.
Okay,
but-
so they just have to have their license or certification in order to be able to have that.
Yeah, I'm not positive on that level of detail, but I believe that there are like professional qualifications, yeah. We still don't have guidance on 179D. It has been one of the pieces of the IRA that has been really lagging. They told us we were gonna get guidance in December, we still don't have it. So as I mentioned with the domestic content stuff, guidance could blow this up. But we don't have guidance yet, so we're sort of operating under what has historically been the case with 179D and then what's in the actual IRA bill text.
So do you think we're gonna have that before November?
Probably,
Question.
that one, I mean, they said that it was imminent. This is also one that's not probably really super politicized. It's been around a long time. It's not really one that's like on the radar of things, so. Just compare, side-by-side comparison of what this looked like before the IRA and now. So as I said, used to be only $1.80 per square foot, now it's up to $5. One of the biggest differences is historically you could take a partial deduction on per system size. So you could get to a partial deduction by reducing the envelope energy, the energy use associated with the envelope by 10%. Now it has to be full building, so full building 25%. Still applies to the lighting, HVAC, hot water, and building envelope systems. Now allows for this retrofit plan with the retrofit pathway. You can now take the deduction multiple times in the same building. So you can take the deduction and then 3 years later do more retrofits and get to another 25% from that existing and take it again. And then the labor provisions apply now. Okay. This is the one that I mentioned. I've been less in the weeds of this, but I did want to note it. This is for residential new construction, so anyone that might be in the development world with multifamily, or single family, honestly, but, it does provide a tax, this one is a tax credit, and it's, there's different levels. If you go to, this higher level of, design, for the zero energy ready home, multifamily program, you get these higher levels of credits. But again, this is new construction and it's for the builder. Okay. Transportation, so there is a tax credit available for EV charging, and other alternative fuels, but let's just talk about EV charging because I think it's probably gonna be the most relevant. It is also geographically limited. So here's another map that they give us, and it looks really similar to that one I showed you earlier, where, you know, this uptown area is not eligible, but the areas in yellow are. So some of your properties may be eligible for this. For all of these tax credits, if you basically Google alternative fuel refueling property map, you can get to these maps. And then for commercial vehicle purchases, there is also an additional credit for commercial vehicle purchasing of EVs. Okay. Transferability, so we talked a bit about the elective pay, which is really for public entities and non-tax entities, but the IRA also introduced this concept of transferability. Historically, if the owner of a solar system doesn't have enough tax liability to monetize the credit, they have to bring in a tax equity partner. There was a complex financial structure where the tax equity partner owns it for a few years and then they do a swap, and it was a really complex transaction. This transferability option was introduced to sort of alleviate some of those transaction costs, and so it creates basically a secondary market for these tax credits, where you can sell your tax, you can build a solar system and sell your tax credit, and someone with a tax liability can buy it for like 95 cents on the dollar, and then they use it for their own tax purposes. So they don't have to own the system, etc. This one does have guidance. It requires a pre-registration of the credits. The buyer of the credit takes on a lot of the risk, so that contract between the seller and the buyer is gonna have a lot of lawyers looking at it. But it's really designed to make it a little easier to monetize these credits for entities that historically haven't been able to. It's not, but it's not available for everything, including 179D. Okay. November. I mean, who knows what is actually gonna happen, but the industry advisor lawyer that a lot of Ameresco and a lot of us use has some great podcasts on this topic. They talk about it a lot. This is not my opinion. This is what I heard on this podcast from a lawyer. So don't quote me on any of this, but it's gonna take some time. If there is a full changeover and Republicans have all houses of Congress plus the presidency, it's still gonna take some time to get bills spun up that would completely repeal the IRA. That said, there are ways that a new administration could slow down an implementation, like through the issuing of guidance and the regulations. They could really there are some ways that they could come up the works sort of more readily. But then there are some aspects of the bill that are probably quite safe, like the manufacturing credits, 179D. They're probably not really going to be on the chopping block. We didn't talk about grants because, as I said, they're not super relevant to your customers except the public sector. Grants might be on the, they're a little bit more easy to repeal. A new administration could say, like, Department of Energy, just stop issuing FOAs for grants. So there are ways they could do that. That's why we're seeing on the grant side, grants are fast and furious right now. They're getting out the door right now. So we're hearing. Again, who knows? Lots of things could change, but, that's what I've heard. Okay, that's it. Any questions?
It's a lot of
Okay,
information.
yeah, it's a
for-
lot.
Well, you know, I think that we
Heather
have.
had one more question.
Oh, sorry.
So I know that typically people will go through, qualified professionals and, consulting companies to handle the majority of this in most cases. And this is a little bit different than, other incentives, rebates, or they're just to cut a check. This is, linked to the IRA. So from your experience, has there been a high percentage and maybe higher with more scrutiny with the newer version than the older version, of like repealing or retracting certain
Like clawing
judgments?
back?
Yeah.
So it's kind of too new, because if you think about it, it passed in August of '22. A system something would have had to been built in '23 to be claimed on on '23 taxes, and so, companies would be taking these tax credits right now at the earliest on the tax filing that they're doing right now. But I think there's a lot of concern that there's a lot of nuance and rules, especially on the labor provisions. I think there's a lot of concern that the labor provisions won't be done exactly right, and there could be a clawback, and penalty, and there's like a whole penalty system associated with those. I think the contracting community, us included, have really invested, this is why my job exists, like, to get into, it's me and our director of government relations, like, in the depths of this, and using outside legal counsel to help us, make sure that when we're delivering projects, we're delivering them in compliance with this stuff.
But it sounds like even if you built a project, and if you get, guidance down the road that changes that, then you might have to pay some of that back.
Most of the guidance, if you start construction under a temporary rule, then that's the rule that you operate under. So there is that level of certainty that the guidance that you have when you start construction is what you can continue to operate under.
How does some of this go to like the commercial building people? What can they tap into for their facilities to help them? I can understand schools or building new plants or whatever, but, Steve at his building or build some of his buildings, what benefit can they get out of this?
So if you install solar, if you install batteries, or if you do a major retrofit, of your commercial building to get to the, 179D level. But depending on who owns your building or who owns these facilities, they would be the ones that would have to monetize it through their taxes, so. Are y'all with like JLL or something?
Everybody's a little different.
Yeah.
JLL's here.
Yeah. So I don't know, maybe, like, how do you see this applying? I'm not sure who I'm talking to honestly right now, but.
Not me.
Well, I think it's each individual building, right, or groups of buildings, because, some are mid-sized, some are a lot bigger, like Bank of America Plaza versus, Brunswick Court. So, really, looking at that. So, like Patricia's building over here, we're at the Union Dallas, and I think that, she's got retail, multifamily, she's got, office, she's just got a little bit of everything, so she'd have to go back to her owners and have that conversation with them. I think that.
Yeah, the biggest thing we're looking at right now is retrofitting the lighting, so, in the garages, but not anything else.
But
at this
also, this
point.
is a fairly new building too. A
It
lot of our
is.
buildings are existing buildings. They were built, they were retrofitted, and they've got to go through this whole process again. So we only have a handful of buildings that are fairly new.
Is anyone contemplating on-site solar? Well, if you were.
Well, also, like JLL and Red Development, all these building owners have buildings outside of this too. So, even though we want to reduce our energy, water, and transportation consumption by 50% by 2030 in our boundaries, it's still beneficial kind of go outside of that too and say, hey, our other buildings also need this. So I think it's important, even though those buildings are not a part of us, they're, using these best practices to go out there and do things.
And I know part of the problem for us, like when you mentioned it, right, especially like with the EV charging, we fall into that one spot that just, we don't qualify, right, because we're in the uptown area. EV charging would be huge for us because we want to change the units that are in there, upgrade them, update them, and it would be nice to have a credit back for them, but it sounds like we're not qualifying for
Well,
it.
but even for the IRA bill, that I get it, but we've got other things happening
Yeah.
with the COG, like we had Susan come out and talk. Hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have an update from her on where those grants are going for building owners. So there are things happening, but yeah, for the IRA bill, that's, that white spot that we're in, it's kind of tough here.
Well, and that's for the EV charging. The 179D is not geographically isolated, and I think probably one lesson for the 179D side is looking at bigger, more comprehensive retrofits instead of one, portion of your building. So, trying to find a comprehensive portfolio that will get you to 25%. That 25% threshold is, substantial. Although you can look at it from the code baseline, and I don't know if y'all noticed, but the code baseline is actually 91/2007 currently. So it does, it's not the current code. But if you have a really, and this may be not the right example because this is a new building, but if you have an older building where you have, quite a bit less efficient equipment, you could get to that 25+% and, get a deduction again.
If you wanna add on, Freddie, Fannie, HUD have all kinds of incentives that are not this complicated. And I know all of this depends on having a huge tax accounting team that can chase all this down. If your buildings are really outside of Dallas and in the USDA rural map, which is really easy to read on their website, they cannot give money away fast enough. Their Rural Energy for America grants that apply to commercial, not multifamily, but commercial, they'll do up to 500,000 for half of any energy efficiency program, but that grant goes up to $1 million for half of the cost of solar. And they cannot get the money out the door fast enough because it's grants and they know there's a possibility that it all dries up. So,
And the REAP program, I've looked at that so many different ways, and I think that's the impression that I get. It's like, it's really accessible, USDA is really accessible. The value is, $1 million for a, medium-sized building is substantial, but, that only gets you so far.
that's 100% grant.
Yeah.
And it does only get you so far, but when you add it, when you start piling these things on top of each other, it can add up. But they are easier to work with.
I would say if you're a building owner, I would work with your consultant or building consultant, companies such as Ameresco here who's talking, and gather as much information as you can. And work with your in-house tax consultant so they're on the same page.
And also the vendors too, these large vendors, they've got, public affairs and they know exactly what's going on. Remember, they've been there, done that, or, they understand this process a lot better too. So the vendor can also guide you through this process along with the other group of people that you have to work with to understand all this. So yeah, totally agree with
Be
that.
careful.
No, I know,
They
but.
promise it 50% and it's not even close. So just make sure that you know what you're talking about, and I'm not here to pitch Train, I'm here to be a part of this, but Train, as well as all our competitors, have been pushing this decarb sustainability initiative to try and initiate that business, and everything I hear is up to 50%, up to 50%. Well, the reality is that's not true. So you just have to make sure that you are patient and you work within your own resources to make sure you get the proper information, because we're there to push you to max it. Look at the dream we can promise you. Well, that's not really true. So yeah, make sure you have the information that you get on your own, not from what your vendors are selling, because they're going to sell you the golden egg.
Yeah,
And
that's,
that's
I mean,
exactly-
you're exactly right, because that's why I said you've gotta have that group of people there, to say, hey, you know, we're internal and we know our numbers, you're external, you know your numbers and how it's supposed to work, so the teams working together, I think, are gonna be super important, just like you pointed out.
And that's exactly why this presentation existed to begin with, is that we were hearing on the street, people had 70% ITC in their mind, and we had, it's an educational campaign to be like, you know, yeah, it would be to our benefit to go around and say like 70% off, but you know, that's not actually how it's gonna play out, so better to be the trusted advisor and act with accurate information.
Well, I do have some, you know, if there's no more questions, I just have a couple of final thoughts, from our meeting I wanted to address with you, but, are there any more questions for Cassidy?
Thank you.
I had a couple of final thoughts. I know that I reached out to you, Cassidy, and said that, you know, when we were having our meeting, a lot of folks were saying, hey, you know, are there some best practices that we can use or case studies, because, you know, is the money kind of really going through, and, you know, where is it landing? And I know that we talked about this and there's not much out there, but can you kind of talk through, are things closing? Will they be closing? What are you seeing on your end?
I mean, every solar project that we have built as a company, the assumption is the 179D is part of it, and compliance with that is, you know, we've been doing ITC, did I say 179D? We've been doing ITC, solar installations that involve the ITCs for a decade, because the ITC has been around for a while. The transferability closings, like the closings of deals where credits are being transferred, will only be starting right now. And it's what I was just mentioning to him, that the IRA came into law August 2022. A system, however you're getting a tax credit, has to be fully built, placed in service, and then whatever taxpayer is taking the credit then has to file their taxes and and claim the credit. And so, you know, that's really starting to pick up right now.
Okay.
I don't think I answered your question fully. I mean, I guess what is a best practice, or like what is unclear about a best practice that I might be able to?
Well, not a
Speak to.
specific one, but you know, you were talking about how it's vague and it's, you know, we don't know exactly what they want. Are there any like case studies or best practices that we can say, oh, okay, you know, that kind of falls under what I was thinking and I can push forward like that. I was just wondering if, you know, you guys have any best practices kind of put together, or, you know, and kind of seeing what's happening on the other end. You know, are things closing? Are you producing case studies to put out there? I mean, are we really moving forward at a good pace, or we're still kind of stuck waiting for this guidance to come through fully? I guess what I'm saying is, what is your perspective on all this going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think the credits that have been, that weren't really modified substantially, like the ITC and PTC, have continued and have grown. And Ameresco wouldn't necessarily have a case study about a customer's ITC, I think. Like we would want to make sure that the system is built correctly, that we have the documentation to support the taxpayer, but we wouldn't necessarily produce like a marketing document that talks about our customer's ITC.
I guess I meant, you know, more internal.
Yeah, Vince, do you
I
have
can
like
comment
thoughts
on
on
that a
this?
little bit and it's really important to divide that into two categories: tax credits and tax deductions. There's a big difference between the two. And the tax credits are flowing. You know, we have tax credits coming in for our energy assets that we own. I think the part that's vague are really some of the bonus credits. The system itself is working for obtaining the tax credits. It's just on those 10% kind of kickers for labor and things that aren't quite settled.
We
That should
have
get settled
closed
for this
a
year.
energy communities deal,
We
actually,
closed an
we
energy
have,
communities deal.
yeah.
And then tax deductions, the tax deductions is an existing program. So if you're a tax-paying entity and you can take 179 tax deductions, that's been operating for years. It's just the way that it's codified is different. And now the tax deduction significantly increased if you can hit that 25% UI reduction. And really, like Cassidy said, and I'll stress that is against code. So a 25% reduction against code is actually pretty obtainable, if you're thinking holistically about your building retrofits. And when that's done, up to $5 a square foot is pretty significant tax reduction for those building owners. And that has unlimited carry forward. So for the financial folks out there, you can receive that tax deduction and then have unlimited carry forward if you don't have all of that as a tax liability in that year. And just carry it forward and keep going on. To Jerry's point, it helps the guys owning the buildings. But we need them to make the investment for all of us. So.
It's a team effort.
Yep.
Sounds good. Any final thoughts here before I wrap up? No? Well, thank you again. Thank you, Cassidy. Thank you, Vincent. Appreciate it. We also have a panel discussion at the, am I gonna get this right? The Climate Symposium. It's so many different words together, but it's on April 4th. We're gonna be talking about how the Dallas 2030 district is trying to make Dallas a great place to live, work, and play. So I hope that you can attend. It's at Kay Bailey. It is free on April 4th, and it's gonna be Patricia, who is the general manager of this building, and thank you for hosting us. And it's going to be Brandon. He works with Jerry over at FPA, got that right. And then Charlene from the Texas Pace Authority, and we're gonna have a great discussion on the financing perspective, the sustainability perspective, and then the building perspective on all of this. So it's gonna be really good. It's gonna be about an hour long, but it won't even feel like an hour because it's gonna be so interesting. I hope that you can make it. If you need a calendar invite, I can send that over to you. Just reach out to me. But I'll be sending those out to our members on the Friday, tomorrow, so that you can mark your calendars. But we're super excited and looking forward to seeing these faces again. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to meet you all.